Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. It's Black History Month, and you know what that means. You got a whole bunch of these little salty white supremacists online saying, "What about White History Month?" So, of course, what it shows is that just about like everything else in the world, these white supremacists feel that even the calendar has an anti-white bias. But it also shows the necessity for protecting our culture and our history, because there's more than white supremacists for us to be concerned about. We have to make sure that our history is a no-claim jumper or bandwagon zone. What they hate the most about Black History Month is, just by simply saying that such a thing exists, it's a not-so-subtle reminder to them that we're still here, and that everything that they've done hasn't been forgotten. It reminds them of the bill. That's what it is. It reminds them of the bill that is long overdue. And they know that the day of reckoning is growing ever closer. They don't know exactly when it is, but they know that when it finally arrives, there's going to be hell to pay. And speaking of hell to pay, the Orange Man is putting all kinds of restrictions for immigration in place, including restrictions on Ukraine, making it where it's going to be that much harder for the people who are trying to refugee here from there to say, well, I got some family member or somebody I know over there who will vouch for me, and somebody who says that they'll go ahead and stick up for me financially, so you gotta let me in. He's going, no, not so fast. Now, of course, let's be mature here. The Orange Man is no doubt doing this as a wet, sloppy kiss to his handler, to President Putin, to let him know that, hey, he's still trying to do everything that he can to pressure the Ukrainians, because after all, they refused to go ahead and start that indictment or investigation into Hunter Biden on Trump's behalf. And since this is the Trump revenge tour, it's time to go ahead and put the screws to Zelensky. Of course, the main focus is going to be on countries and people from south of the border. The white media has played the sad violins, but there's no massive protest for these mass deportations. After decades of being told that all hell would break loose if anyone attempted to round up all of the illegal aliens and send them back home en masse, instead the response from the American public has been deafening silence. And as we all know, silence indicates assent. So what this indicates is that neither Trump nor the Republican Party is going to be made to pay a political price for this, no matter what the white media, at least the left corner of it, may try to claim. And no amount of falling star power is going to change public sentiment on this either. Some nobody named Selena Gomez was crying and boo-hooing in some video that she posted online. So the Trump White House decided to respond by having the mothers of females killed by illegal aliens give a video response.
What about our children who were brutally murdered and raped and beat to death?
I just want to say that I'm so sorry. All my people are getting attacked. The children.
Seeing that video, it's hard to believe that it's actually genuine and real because she's an actress.
You don't know who you're crying for. What about our children who were brutally murdered and raped and beat to death and left on the floor by these illegal immigrants?
I just feel like it's a ruse to deceive people and to garner sympathy for lawlessness.
I wish I could do something, but I can't.
My daughter was a child. There's many other children whose lives were taken due to people who crossed here illegally.
They didn't cry for our daughters.
No one has stood up except for us mothers to cry out about our children.
I am so happy that Trump won. I am so glad that this is one of the first bills to help with immigration.
It's only been 2 weeks, if that, since he's been in office, and he's taking accountability and he's making moves and he's making things happen.
President Trump genuinely cares for the American people, and he cares for the American family.
I truly appreciate everything Donald Trump has done.
We stand with President Trump in making America safe again.
Now, I have no idea what this Selena Gomez character was thinking. If white women tears didn't stop Trump from disparaging a dead white female army pilot, then why did this Gomez woman think that her white Latina tears would have any effect? Well, forget it. DC is a town without pity, especially these days. Winter's not the only reason that it's cold inside the Beltway. See, the Orange Man is showing unapologetic boldness in the face of opposition. He's taking the hard line for his constituents. Biden and Kamala, on the other hand, ran away from every position they ever pretended to take. And this is the reason why even the folks who don't like Donald Trump, they nonetheless have to give him some measure of grudging respect, because the man makes sure that, at least to an extent, his words and his deeds occupy the same space, which is something that the Democrats thought they didn't have to be bothered to do. But since it's Black History Month, and with everything that's going on with immigration, you got a lot of folks who all of a sudden are trying to find some way to start banging that drum that illegal aliens and asylum seekers somehow have something to do with civil rights. Yeah, because everybody remembers how Dr. King was fighting for the right to cross the border illegally, right? See, it's more than just white supremacists who don't like the idea of Black History Month. There are a lot of these other groups who take umbrage with it as well, and the main reason happens to be that when we speak about our history, we talk about what we have done in this country, the history that we have made, the undeniable mark on humanity that we have left. We left the place for the better. On the other hand, when you talk with these groups, especially these immigrant groups, they're trying to find a way to grandfather clause in their own traditions from their own home countries. They can only talk about things that happened outside the United States. See, when you decide that you're going to actually stand on business, then what happens is you have no choice but to make history because you're going to be doing things that have never been done before. And that's something that makes a lot of people resentful of us. Whenever you talk about our history, it is an uninterrupted parade of progress, struggle, and accomplishment here in this land. Nobody can delegitimize it at all because we built this country. Not only did we build it, but we also fortified it with whatever morality it may claim to have. Now, if other groups don't like the fact that Black people are able to point legitimately to what we've done in this country, then shouldn't these people be able to point out their own traditions of resistance and struggle in the United States as well? Well, the problem is too many of them, on their driver's licenses and on the census forms, they identify as white. And many, if not most, have gone on the record attacking Black people, even Black children. The go-to all-purpose excuse that so many use is that, well, the governments in their home countries are corrupt. That's the reason why they decided to flee. The governments of the places they come from are corrupt. Well, gee, what a surprise. So is this one in the United States. And we didn't flee. We didn't run. We stood and we fought. And we've been doing it for hundreds of years. None of these immigrant groups can say that. The struggle of Black Americans, specifically foundational Black Americans in this country, ours is the longest and most sustained struggle for freedom in human history. And yet we have people who come here because we made it possible, and they spit in our faces. They call us every racial slur they can, both in English and in their own language. They tell us that we're lazy and that they're the hard-working ones, when in reality, white power handed them every crumb of their daily bread. And what they're seeing is that Black people called it right when we told them that if white power has the ability to give you everything, it can also take everything away. We've told them for generations now that they may want to see themselves as white adjacent, but the white supremacists won't play along with this delusion. Some of them thought it actually meant something because one or two people from the dominant society might sleep with them, or even marry them, or even have children by them. That this meant that they were solidly on the team now. They're on the inside. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke explained for decades on end, white power has always understood the need to practice bedroom politics. Rupert Murdoch stands putrid testament to that. He wanted to get his hooks into China, and that's why he married a Chinese woman and even had children by her. But whenever it comes time to talk about his media empire, or how it's going to be divided up upon his death, the only names we ever hear are his two white sons. What the Tethers and these other groups will never understand is that white power has always understood the necessity to have either gutter sex or some bastard children by individuals who it wants to co-opt. The white supremacists have always realized that a lot of people go getting confused once you get them in the bedroom. And once you have children by them, man, their minds are completely and thoroughly tied up like a pretzel. But white supremacy is not confused at all. It understands exactly what its goals are, and that sleeping with someone or even having children by them is merely a means to an end. Nothing more than that. The Biden administration, as part of its no borders, no problem policy, promised to allow more than 530,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to fly to the U.S. if American sponsors agreed to help them financially. Nobody needed to actually prove that they would help them. They merely needed to say that they would. So for those of you wondering why there's so many people bums rushing the border, it's because most of them have at least one relative already in the U.S., or at least someone who would be willing to say, I'll help them financially. And that apparently was the bar that the Democrats and Joe Biden had set up. All you need is one person who says they'll vouch for you, and that's good enough. Now, normally, you don't let anyone into any country unless that person can prove that they can financially sustain themselves. If they need to be depending on other people to keep them afloat, that guarantees that they're going to wind up becoming a ward of the state. But then again, many of these countries, like Mexico, show their citizens in advance how to apply for U.S. government aid programs, so that's their plan. The Trump administration would revoke the parole status of those allowed into the U.S. under the CHNV policy and place them in deportation proceedings if they fail to apply for or obtain another immigration benefit like asylum, a green card, or temporary protected status. That's something I told you about before. Those whose parole classification is revoked and who lack another immigration status would become ineligible to work in the U.S. lawfully. They would also receive notices to appear in immigration court, which we all know would be the first step in the deportation process. So that's what the Orange Man is setting up. It's not going to be a revolving door, it's just going to be a one-way road back to wherever. And Venezuela has reportedly, according to the Trump White House anyway, finally acceded to the Orange Man's demands and said that they're going to be taking back their citizens whenever they land in that country. Now, this is what's being talked about for 500,000 people here, and the Orange Man is right that the system has been totally and completely abused. Everyone knows that all they have to do is simply say, I'm seeking asylum, and that can be used as a catch-all loophole to let them enter regardless of whether it's true or not. And everyone's been using it. Apparently all the world now are asylum seekers. Everybody's being persecuted. Well, at least now, if these Trump administration policies are serious, at least some of them are actually going to have to start proving it, and it's going to be a hell of a lot more difficult. So that being the case, instead of people deciding that they're going to flee looking for asylum, they're instead going to be told they need to stand and get some freedom in their own lands. Imagine that. And speaking of freedom in one's own land, there's been reports about Trump's Department of Defense canceling Martin Luther King observances, Juneteenth, etc. Now, family, we ought to know the danger of accepting gestures in the place of true progress. But I know that for many of you, it probably does matter if the military is observing some of these things, and that's fine. For those of you who are just so sensitive about those kind of things and you want to take this as proof positive that the Orange Man is not on the side of the angels, you'll get no argument from me. Go ahead and take this as a not-so-friendly reminder that even though the Orange Man's policies are upsetting some people who previously thought they found a comfortable place under white supremacy, he's still not on our side. And speaking of which,
and as we are fighting hard to get birthright citizenship or automatic citizenship for the children of illegal aliens, that's another way. It's automatic citizenship for children of illegal aliens. That's the other term that they use, which is actually more accurate, more understandable. And it's ridiculous. We're the only country that has it, and certainly the only country that has it to that extent. And it wasn't meant, if you look, it was really meant for children of slaves. This is when it happened. The children of slaves, it was not meant for everyone to come into our country by airplane or charging across the borders from all over the world and think they're going to become citizens. It's not meant for that. It wasn't meant for that. And hopefully at some point the courts will understand that without having to go through a whole big deal. This was meant for the children of slaves, and look at the timing of it and you'll see, and I hope judges will understand that. And it has to stop because it's really hurting our country very badly in the coming weeks.
While it's good that, at least for this discussion, the Republicans are willing to say that the 14th Amendment was specifically for descendants of slaves, we have to make sure that we handcuff them to that position. If they're using that argument in order to undergird a legal case that all of this birthright citizenship has been completely and thoroughly abused and is most likely illegal, well, there's not going to be any argument from me on that one. As far as I'm concerned, the Trump White House is living proof that a stopped clock is right at least twice a day. But just remember that when it comes time for us to go ahead and apply the pressure for what we are owed, and we start reminding them of their own words that they have acknowledged the 14th Amendment, and hence they have to acknowledge all the things that were not done for the descendants of slaves, you're going to find them trying the usual, well, we said this law was specifically for descendants of slaves, but the operative part of that were the words was and slaves. They'll revert to the old talking point where they inevitably try to slither away from their own words, and they'll try to do it on the basis of claiming, well, this law was for the descendants of slaves. And then they'll revert to the usual phony white supremacist talking points saying, but nobody alive was a slave or can claim that their parents were, etc. So the 14th Amendment has been fulfilled. We ain't got to worry about it anymore. While we can certainly recognize the usefulness of the Republicans' momentary admission, let's also understand they're not saying these things because they intend to do us any favors. We're going to have to force these scumbags to do things that they don't want to do. And you know what? That's fine by me. But as for the other groups who are taking umbrage at Black History Month and resentful of the fact that we made our history here at home because we didn't flee, they want to ride our coattails and try to lay claim to the civil rights movement for actions and groups who, truth be told, were opposing the civil rights movement and opposing the Black community. Well, we're not going to stand for it. You've had illegal aliens trying to claim that they're just like the Freedom Riders. The caravans of people illegally entering the country, they want to try to call themselves the Freedom Riders. The Freedom Riders were citizens of this country, fighting for their rights here at home. They weren't foreigners who were in the country illegally. So this is not an issue of civil rights, it's an issue of basic law. When you see people like the Nuri Martinez and other anti-Black racists, keep in mind, they got elected because they were anti-Black. Their constituencies in California and elsewhere, they knew exactly what they were getting voting for these people, and they were fine with it. Because what they'd been thinking for the last 50 years was that they were going to be basically honorary members of the oppressor class, and that they were all going to close ranks against Black Americans, and what it turned out was there's no honor among thieves. I'm not going to feel sorry because somebody's grand plan to put the knife on our backs backfired. When we talk about tethers and how it's the culture of tethers to lie and be dishonest, just understand, they're not alone. And the impact of this new immigration policy, if it is sustained and reinforced, would have beneficial effects not just inside the United States, but outside of it as well. The fact that Trump is stopping the U.S. from being used as a pressure release valve for these corrupt countries is going to force changes there. And that's what the Blanco ruling class in Latin America doesn't want. They get to reign in hell and have countries that are 60 years behind the rest of the world, but it's okay with them because they're in charge, and so long as that's the case, nothing else matters to them. They've kicked the can down the road on the reckoning that has been long in the making. It's time for these corrupt Blancos in Latin America and the other corrupt kleptocrats elsewhere in the world to finally have to face the music. And it's time for these people who have been telling us how hard-working they are to go back home and prove it by putting in some work to change those places. It's time to be proud of home. And when you're proud of home, you stay there and build it up. And then, maybe in 100 years or so, they'll finally have a track record of civil rights accomplishments of their own that they can point to, so that they will no longer have to try to co-opt someone else's. Seeing the immigration crisis and the deliberate anti-Black racism that's been imported here for so long finally stop, well, that would be something to celebrate. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Leftrabia Lawson, Cornell Sly, Kinyari Ratcliffe Hossein, Isaac, and Keith LaRue. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.